Utah Judicial Institute, ABA, and National Drug Court. Institute focusing on traffic evidence, constitutional law, and criminal procedure and law. But I want to also add that Judge Michael Kwan has recently taken a position for APAPA as our CEO. We're so honored and happy that we have his leadership. He's phenomenal, unique, and one that does really, truly take action. That's the word that we've been talking about quite often here in this conference, and one that we truly have to focus in on as we proceed after this conference. It's not about what we talk about here, it's truly what we do. And this I call him a young man because he's younger than I. So he truly is one that takes action. So, Michael, without further ado, I'll let you take over this panel and introduce the audience, to what you'll be doing. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Glenn. All right. So you probably tell that one of my first actions as CEO was to give Glenn additional duties as my publicist. So we're here today to talk about the costs and benefits of being engaged in civil engagement. And we don't want to sugarcoat, get you all revved up, get you all into it, and have you go out there and go, whoa, what has happened to me? So this esteemed panel is going to talk to you about their experiences being engaged in the city, or you're civically engaged, sorry. And in the interest of time, I'm going to have them introduce themselves and give a brief statement. Hillary?
No, thank you very much, Judge. My name is Hillary Shelton. I'm the director of the NAACP's Washington Bureau and serve as Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy for the National NAACP.
Hi, my name is Alexander Greer. I'm a professor of chemistry at Brooklyn College and a co-chair of the Committee of Concerned Scientists. I wonder if now would be a
Sure.
okay time, since, although you didn't make a lengthy comment, if I could bend your ear for a few minutes just to discuss what we do at the Committee of Concerned Scientists. So pardon if I just take this moment for you. So I appreciate this opportunity to have an opening statement on behalf of the Committee of Concerned Scientists, the CCS. The Committee of Concerned Scientists is an independent organization of scientists, physicians, engineers, and scholars devoted to the protection and advancement of human rights and scientific freedom for colleagues all over the world. It has been in existence for about 50 years. The Committee of Concerned Scientists is deeply concerned about human rights issues around the world, including the 1.5 million Uyghurs held in Chinese internment camps, where a vocal condemnation should come from American and Chinese American communities on this egregious human rights violation. On behalf of the Committee of Concerned Scientists, I wish to make an appeal to the forum to accept a resolution condemning China's policy toward Uyghurs and demanding immediate closure of the internment camps. The Committee of Concerned Scientists also expresses concern to what it believes to be ethnic profiling of Chinese scientists by the U.S. government. Let me expand on this latter point. The Committee of Concerned Scientists believes that ethnic profiling and investigation of Chinese scientists has no place in our country. Importantly, it is counterproductive since free academic exchange between scientists in the U.S. and China is crucial for discoveries to be made that will in turn benefit the United States. The Committee of Concerned Scientists calls upon the U.S. government to immediately stop the campaign of intimidation of ethnic Chinese scientists and make a public statement assuring them that they will be treated as equally valuable members of the American society. The pattern of targeting Chinese scientists in the United States is not new. The Committee of Concerned Scientists has written on behalf of Wenho Li in 1999, Sherry Chen in 2014, and Xiaoxing Xi in 2015. Now, in spring of this year, the National Institutes of Health issued a warning to U.S. medical centers about, quote, systematic efforts by foreign nationals to steal intellectual property. I'd like to expand on this a little. This at least led us to a rhetorical question at the CCS. Should the United States hide its cancer research from China? An alarming series of recent cases has arisen against ethnic Chinese scientists that work on cancer or in cancer-related biomedical research. For example, scientists and professors have been dismissed at MD Anderson in Houston, as well as Emory University in Atlanta. The idea that science innovation flows one way from the U.S. to China, promulgated in some circles of the U.S. government, is completely outdated. It has led to human rights abuses and is negatively affecting U.S. universities and research centers. The U.S. government must recognize that currently China is a major source of science, innovation, and a giant force in biomedical research. This does not produce weapons and does not help countries achieve technological superiority. If there is any area in which the two leading world powers can cooperate for the benefit of humanity, fighting cancer is the one. The Committee of Concerned Scientists believes that there is little justification for decoupling the U.S. cancer research effort from that in China under the pretext of protecting intellectual property. In fact, naively, one would think that it would benefit U.S. pharmaceutical industry more than it would benefit U.S. citizens. A combined effort to fight cancer by China and the U.S. could result in faster progress. So in closing, thank you for the opportunity to serve on the panel on behalf of the Committee of Concerned Scientists, in which our efforts continue to counter ethnic profiling of Chinese scientists in the U.S. The Committee of Concerned Scientists finds these actions by our government abhorrent and have written the President of the U.S., the Attorney General, and leaders of both houses of Congress requesting such behavior cease. Lastly, I call upon you to accept a resolution on behalf of the Uyghurs. I hope that you will want to address it organizationally. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Alex. I should direct all my colleagues to you now, instead of they just vent on the WeChat. My name is Amy Mateki. I'm a physician. Actually, I'm a full-time practice physician, and also I feel like I'm full-time doing or learning this civic engagement. How I end up here, I train in China, practice medicine, internal medicine with the Western medicine and the Chinese medicine there. And when I came to this country, I realized there's so much I can help with this country. We have, Western medicine dominated, but also I felt, acupuncture, Eastern medicine can help with many of the chronic disease management. So that's how I end up. You look at the title as a president of International Center for Integrative Medicine. I can see if you want to be a president, you just start a nonprofit organization, and end up you are the president because you have to do all the work. One of my patients is a co-founder with me. How that happened is he is very Western-minded, but benefited from the treatment, the Chinese medicine I offered, integrative care. And then he said, well, wait a minute, nobody's doing this in this country. And by the way, he's a lawyer. Another reason I will tell you why I draw to the civic engagement, because it looks like the doctors study hard, get all the education, and the lawyers tell us what to do. They make all the policies. And the judge actually dictate, what get put on the table. So this lawyer friends actually started encouraging me. And for 2 years, he meet with me every week. I can tell you how stubborn I am. Every week, he's like, tell me, Amy, you should tell the people what you're doing and spread what you're doing to help more patients in this country. And I keep telling him, I don't want to be the first bird fly out of the forest. You guys know that saying, right? But finally, he was fed up. He said, okay, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to use SF to work with somebody else. And then the fear of loss, I feel like, I said, okay, let's talk about it. So that's how the nonprofit is formed. Fast forward to 2016, I get appointed to the California Acupuncture Board by Governor Brown. One of the reasons I felt the California acupuncture is very divided. Everybody want to be the first. Everybody want to be the well-known doctors. So end up is very confusing to the Western medicine world and also to Governor Brown. At that time, he was very passionate about the acupuncture board. They wanted to put someone there to be neutral and also can get everybody together on the table. So how I end up being the president is I get elected to the vice president after 6 months appointed to the board. And then the next month, I was the president.
We are a group. We are a group that is in many ways artificial because people in Asia don't call themselves Asians. And yet, in the United States, there is this group called Asian American Pacific Islanders or Asian Pacific Americans that we must band together as a group because we survive by it, we thrive by it, we also will diminish if we don't stand by it. Now, the start of APA Justice was inspired by a couple events back in 2015. It was the injustice suffered by Sherry Chen, Xiaoxing Xi, and other Chinese American scientists who fell victim to racial profiling. The demonization, the accusation of wrongdoing for an entire group of people only because they are placed under cloud of suspicion. And yet I admire many of them because they have the courage to fight back. I'm glad to be among these distinguished panelists today. And Alec, Amy, and Hillary, I get to know Alec and the Committee of Concerned Scientists throughout the years, where the committee has really issued many timely statements in support of the Chinese American or Asian American scientists. And we'll be sharing our thoughts and experiences with you today. But we're in Virginia today. I do want to also reach out to African Americans. Do you realize that 1619, 400 years ago, was a major turning point in American history? And if you don't realize it, look it up, because Virginia plays a big role, and it was a major turning point because that's the start of slavery in America. So as we reach out, as we reach within, and I'll just mention very quickly that among the 3 Chinese Americans here, one is an ABC. One is someone who has benefited from the Naturalization and Immigration Act in 1965, when the quota, annual quota, was relaxed from 101 a year to much higher. And then we have a recent immigrant, okay, who came within the last 20, 30 years from China. We are a very diverse group. And when we had a chance to sit down and talk, you'll be amazed how much we are the same and how much we are different. So with that, I thank you and for listening.
Great. So I'm going to direct the first question to Dr. Amy. In blending Eastern and Western medicine, it seems like such a natural thing to do. But did you encounter any negativity from either of the traditional practitioners?
Well, I have many of the stories I can see, but the one really imprinted in my head. So I started actually with oncology, cancer patients at Berkeley. One of the oncologists, very conventional oncologist, didn't believe anything about other medicine. And the reason I was invited because I was the chief resident, a graduate, and I did a little bit arrange his lectures so he get to know me, so he trusted me. And then one day he said, hey, I don't know what my Berkeley patients are doing. I tell them, don't do all those alternatives. But they do it anyway. So I need a doctor, look like you have all the credentials and the training. Could you just help me place them, for safety reason and to help my patients? And that's the reason I started oncology, with working with the cancer patients. And when I started, and there's no patients waiting for me, so I went to the cancer treatment. You guys, if you have any experience with it, I just go to the treatment room where they're getting chemotherapies, to look around, find out who need acupuncture. And why I started with acupuncture, I thought the minimal invasive, but also the most effective treatment. It's very simple. I can just put one needles, I will stop nausea, right? So I was looking for patients. And I asked the nurse, asked the doctor, asked the patients who want needles. And after a couple hours, there's no patients. So I came back to tell the oncologist, the director at that time, I said, nobody wanted me to be here. He said, what did you tell them? I said, well, I asked who wanted needles. And then he was sitting there, he said, maybe you should ask different questions. So I was like, different questions. So I was thinking, I went back. It's very close, just a few steps. So I went back to the treatment room. So I was like, different question, what should I ask? And I asked the nurse, I said, why everybody's here? They were like, oh, getting chemo. I said, why somebody don't get chemos here? Oh, because they don't eat. They were nausea. They can't drink, so they are dehydrated. I thought, okay, now I know it. So I said, who has nausea? Who has nausea, vomiting? All the hands raised. So that's how I started to treat all the patients there one by one. So I collected, the patients from there. And then as I was doing really well, get a lot of, attention. And then there's an older oncologist came in, is like, what is all this voodoo medicine we are doing here? And I was like, okay, I know who I said, Dr. So-and-so. I said, you have a problem with it? He's like, no, I'm just trying to find out what's going on here. So I went home, I asked my husband, I said, what does voodoo means? This is 2004. I don't think the Google was working that well. Now I can Google it. So he's like, who asked that question? I said, Dr. So-and-so. He's like, don't worry about it. I was so glad and so naive, I didn't look it up what that means. So 2 years later, I find out what that voodoo means. But I was already so into it, so I was unstoppable, to do this. Am I answered the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Alec, can I ask you a question? First, CCS, you said scientists, physicians, engineers, and scholars, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
In my household, that's called the 4 ways Michael disappointed his parents. None of the above. Tell me about an instance or examples where you've had people react negatively for what you do in terms of going to racial profiling as the reason why somebody's under suspicion. People, I think, initially would say, oh, well, they must have done something wrong.
Well, just trying to get the message out and protest against racial profiling of ethnic Chinese is difficult enough. So I can't think of feedback that came that was against that or challenged that. For example, as I was mentioning to you earlier, there was a Eugene Chudnovsky, a fellow co-chair at CCS, and I tried to publish an op-ed piece highlighting this issue on cancer research and what we think is really, well, it's human rights violations by our government, and it's and we have very strong opinions to it, but we could not get that published. So into newspapers leaning slightly to the right or left, and we gave up and we placed it on our website. So I can't think of something that's come back in a negative sense, kind of to counter or argue against it in that way. I could go into other issues as to whether raising a voice and being very strong with a voice is an advantage or disadvantage in general. Maybe if I could kind
Sure.
of meld the question. And this has come up with human rights violations in Iran, where students have been sent to Evin prison for, if they were educated in the U.S., coming back and charged with treason and with many trumped-up charges. A question of if we were to do advocacy and encourage other human rights groups to do advocacy, can that harm them in any way in their cases? And we get the impression, because we never know. In fact, the success rate is so low, and it's part of a number of organizations' efforts that it's really what's, if handling 40 or 50 cases a year, if we get a few successes, we're happy. So it's kind of dismal in that way. But the sense we get is that the more publicity, the better, which is why I bring up the issue of Uyghurs. The more vocal from Americans and Chinese Americans, the better. Don't let this be hidden or swept under the rug, in a sense. There's a lot of silence on both sides in the U.S., and it's just terrible. But kind of returning to the thought on the Iranian cases, it seems like some of the judges that receive these, that deal with these cases, then have to handle many piles of papers that are then produced as a consequence of human rights groups' activities. It just seems like it's a positive endeavor in that way. So really, I can't think of something negative, or even just in terms of a good kind of intellectual debate as to in that way. We're just trying to get out the message is important and difficult enough.
Thank you. Vice President Hillary, I think this is the 100th anniversary of the NAACP?
110th.
110th. I knew I went to a banquet and 100 was involved. Yeah, that's amazing. The NAACP has done so much in the realm of civil rights and equality. Do you see any parallels between where you've come from as an organization and as a group to the AAPI experience?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, as mentioned, we're 110 years old. If you put that into a time context, a good way to think about it is we were actually formulated about 40 years after the end of the transatlantic slave trade, of slavery in the United States of America, just 40 years. If you think about all the damage that was done, the issues that occurred, and concerns along those lines, and the struggles that the organization has ensued upon within the last 110 years, if you think about the growth of an organization like this, I mean, very well, when we started out, we were a small group of African Americans and white Americans, Christians and Jews, that sat together in a small apartment in New York City looking at what was going on throughout the United States. What we learned is our people were being attacked, challenged even as much as the Constitution guaranteed equal protection and equal opportunity for all Americans, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, or other differences. For some reason, even as slavery ended and we went through the Reconstruction period of our society, which our Constitution was amended 3 times to clarify that these of former servitude, these who were once enslaved in this country, would be able to fully participate. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution that we had to work to pass even then was an amendment that said that there would be equal protection and equal opportunity for all Americans, including those of former servitude. Now, you may ask yourself, were slaves? As the terminology was always a lot sweeter, quite frankly, than what these terms actually meant. But if you think about it, the Constitution guaranteed those things anyway, and Abraham Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation, an executive order that said very well that slavery was now outlawed in the United States. But the question was, what shall we do with these that have been enslaved? They can't be slaves anymore, so what are they? The question was asked. And of course, the 13th Amendment says that there will be equal protection for all, including those, for all Americans. So we clarified what that meant for those who didn't happen to be white male landowners, who are those who've gotten all the rights and protections in our country. Then we passed the 14th Amendment to the Constitution to actually set forward what is citizenship. In other words, the Constitution itself guarantees the rights, privileges, and responsibilities of citizenship. But what are these new people? What they had in mind, as you think about those that signed the Constitution, were many of those that were of European descent that had come to the country and began forming a new nation. So what it said very clearly, that even those of former servitude were also full citizens, and anyone that goes through the naturalization process could become a citizen, and their children would be citizens as well. And as such, the rights, the privileges, and the protections of the U.S. Constitution and citizenship will be upon them as well. Then there was the 15th Amendment to the Constitution that leads to the most powerful tool that we have to be able to advance our agenda. As we're thinking about those for us and organizations like this, which is why we find ourselves working in coalitions so often, is the right to vote. The 15th Amendment to the Constitution very clearly clarified that there will be no obstacles, there will be no programs, no procedures or otherwise that would interfere with the right to vote of Americans in our society by the states or localities. That gave us, again, the tools that we needed, as we've seen in the Asian and Pacific American communities, that have also been needed to shore up those rights and protections. We've seen too often coming up with all kind of interesting new approaches to actually divide us, or for one group to have power over another. The issues and challenges we have seen in our society just too many times. So we've learned from a lot of the same experiences that the API community learns from as well. And that is, as we're moving to secure these rights and protections for and opportunities for our children, oftentimes obstacles are put in our way. So what do we do? Well, let me just say this. One of the things that we've come to understand with an organization, as we mentioned, is 110 years old, an organization that has membership units in every state in the United States, but we're still on military bases in places like Italy, Germany, Korea, and Japan. So think about those rights and moving those issues forward. We understand that there is a place where our issues and challenges are so similar, so very similar. When you think about Japanese internment, I think about the kind of oppression against African Americans that have happened in this society as well, and that those that stole away those real opportunities should be held liable, and the government should be engaged to be able to have those fights as well. When I think about the challenges in the Chinese American communities, as they've come in many ways, you talked about the railroad system and being brought in for those cases, but they were always finding ways to tweak the law to say, even though they've come in, even though the children have been born here that are guaranteed those rights, let's find a way to make sure they don't have all the rights, and we can have the continuous power over this particular group of people as well, and the fights that have to happen, whether it's in our courtrooms, in our Congress, or even from time to time, when we have the right president at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, we can get an executive order to help clarify, strengthen, and help us move ahead along those lines as well. The bottom line is that we've also learned some very, very helpful lessons that many within the API community have learned as well. We're a big country, But the more and more that we look at the diversity and the challenges of various communities, the more we see how much we have in common. When we talk about those common values first, we know that when we think about things in the African American community, the API community thinks about things in API communities, you think about things like being able to get a fair day's wage for a hard day's work. You think about having the civil rights protections to be able to live in any community you want to and not be limited by the color of your skin or your place of national origin. We think about being able to buy a home wherever we want to buy their home. As long as our money will pay for it, your codicil should not stop us from being able to do that. When we think about other rights and privileges, we know that there are a number of tools that we have to use to do it, but we also know that we have a convergence in interest in so many ways. I can give you so many examples of where we're talking about mistreatment by police officers. I thought driving while black was a problem only limited to the African American community until I talked to my friends and coalition partners in the API community and learned that as much as police would treat us wrong and in a differential way, so many stories were told to me by people like one of our common friends, Karen Narasaki, of the challenges within the API community. For some reason, driving while black in Washington, D.C., is driving while Asian in Prince George's County. And then the differences are very much the same, that there's a convergence that we could work together and help move these things forward. So we've worked together to introduce policy. Bills pending on Capitol Hill, changes we were able to get done. When we think about being able to vote, we know that sometimes one of the games played against the Asian community is that they'll make the ballots available to you, but if we have communities that have become citizens, but their first language is not English, they would not make the ballots available in those communities as well. Well, let me just say this. When I think about that, I'm outraged because for some reason or another, language didn't make any difference when they charged me for my income taxes. Language didn't seem to make any difference when they charged me for other kinds of programs and whatnot as well. They didn't say, until you learn to speak English, you don't have to pay taxes. But indeed, that's the way they played the voting game and not making it available. And that's why we work so closely, as another example, with the Asian Pacific Islander community to make sure that the language provisions in the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were fully engaged and deployed in a way that we can make sure that if an American went through the process, no matter when you came in, if you are a citizen, a naturalized citizen, if you very well pay your taxes, and if you very well have the opportunity to register and vote, and the disenfranchisement game should not happen to you, as we've seen them happen in the African American community and so many other communities as well. It's amazing as we go through the list. As a matter of fact, I brought this for you. If you get a chance, this is the NAACP's full legislative agenda. This talks about what we're doing on Capitol Hill in the areas of civil rights protection, criminal justice, economic opportunities, and so many other issues. But I'll tell you what, if you take a look at this, I think you'll probably give me the same response that my friends at the Japanese American Citizens League, the Asian Pacific American Legal Consortium, the Organization of Chinese Americans, and many other Asian groups. When you look at this list, you'll think that this list was your list because the fight is all so similar. I hope you'll grab a copy of it.
Thank you. Dr. Jeremy, yeah, they're handing the mic because they know it's coming your way. You mentioned earlier the almost like generational difference of when you came to the United States, whether you were born here, a long-time immigrant, a recent immigrant, that there are disparities even within the Chinese American community. Could you expound on that?
Thank you, Mike.
It is. We can hear you. No, it's on.
It is on? Okay. Boy, I'm loud enough now. I think Chinese in America started almost 200 years ago. There was a ship that came to Baltimore, and it came from Canton, today's Guangzhou. And if you go to Baltimore, there's actually a neighborhood called Canton. And I think you should go there because that's where the ship docked, and there's a rich history about that. So we've been here in this land for 200 years, almost 200 years. And yet, when you look at the waves of immigration, you can really see today's Chinese American population, and my background is being in statistics, that you can almost see the three categories of Chinese Americans. First, there are those who have been here 5, 6 generations, 7 generations, who helped build the railroad itself. And there were Chinese Americans who fought in the Civil War. And it's not so well known in history. And so there's that fairly big group, the ABCs, those who are born in the US. And then in the 60s, as I mentioned earlier, with the Immigration Naturalization Act of 1965, it opened up the quota. And with that opening up, people like me who came from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, and eventually became naturalized citizens who are pretty much now part of the society. Okay? I work for the federal government in civil rights areas. I would say that's unheard of when I first got into the federal government. And then more recently, you notice that there's the immigrants from China who use WeChat, okay, something that is many of us are not familiar with. I started using WeChat about 3 years ago, and it was totally different experience in many ways. And so within our community, there is a lot of diversity. And I can tell you that one segment of this community is not quite the same. When they start talking, it's not quite the same. The values are not the same. Their experiences are not the same. Okay? And there's a lot that we need to learn from each other, and that bridging need to happen. Because right now, instead of one Chinese American community, I would say it's probably into 3 or even more different portions. I don't know about the composition in this group here, but I would imagine, as exemplified by the 3 of us up here, that we have representation from each of these 3 groups. And I want to add to this, and that is, the Asian American identity is very unique in the US. And so we should not talk about just Chinese Americans. And as we reach out to talk about Japanese Americans and Filipino Americans, I think there are different lessons to be learned there. So we need to speak out, but we also need to listen among the different groups among us. So I don't know if I answer your question, but I think what we need to recognize is that we have diversity inside our groups. And we need to understand that. We need to also reach across and within the Asian American group, as well as across Asian American groups. So with that, I think I would like to be upbeat. Nobody said this will be easy. And the way to do it is to be persistent. Stay on the road, okay? And it may take another 110 years, but the journey is still not over for us. And that needs to be recognized. Thank you.
So in terms of civic engagement, I have a big mouth. You probably recognize that. And I'm not afraid to say what I think and take a stand. Earlier this year, I was suspended from the bench for 6 months without pay for things that I wrote about the direction our country is now headed and how I felt an obligation to stand up and say no for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't want my grandchildren, if I ever get grandchildren, to say, God, that was a terrible time. Why didn't they do something about it? At least I'd have a record that I tried. It's kind of the same way I look back in the 60s, because I was born in the 60s, And I went to the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. And that really moved me. And the question that kept popping in my mind, because it was a judicial conference that I was at, where were the judges? How could the judges allow people to be treated in such a horrific way? And then I realized all the judges then were among the people oppressing. And so it was important for us to diversify the judiciary. Now, I knew when I was writing what I wrote, it was several posts, Facebook, gotta love Facebook, that I would get in trouble. And I really thought, maybe I shouldn't post it. And if you ask my wife, she will tell you, you should not have posted that. Because she said, 6 months without pay. Yeah. So now I'm the breadwinner? And I said, yeah, for now. I knew that I could actually be removed, and I was expecting they would actually take me off the bench. But I felt it was worth it. I felt it was important enough. And I felt that my career is secondary to my country. And if I want my country to be great again, then I had to stand up and say, this is wrong. We're heading in the wrong direction. This is the wrong policy. And I think it's important for all of you to think about that as well, in where you stand at this time when your country needs you. What are you doing to change what's happening? And you don't have to lose your job for 6 months. I don't recommend that for anybody, particularly when you want a new car, but you can't get a new car. But speak up. Do civic engagement. Register new voters. Get people naturalized. And then get them to the polls. In 2016, I don't know if Karthik mentioned this, but I stole this data point from him. Of all of the eligible voters in our community, only half were registered. Half. The other half could vote, but didn't even fill out the form. And of the registered voters, only half of them voted. So 75%, 3 out of 4 votes that we could have cast were silent. 3 out of 4 voices really silenced themselves. Now, those of you in this room are all over the country. You're engaged with your communities, and I think it's very important that even if this is your only form of protest, even if you agree with what's happening, we need more voices in our chorus. Our choir is too small. It's not strong. It's not speaking at the volume at which it could speak. And it's our obligation as community advocates, community activists, to go out and shake the tree, find those voters, because votes are change. In this country, we don't have political change by bullets. We have political change by ballots, and that's a privilege. It's unlike other countries in this world, and if we don't exercise it now, people will wonder 50 years from now, what did these guys do? They knew what was going on. So don't let yourselves fall into safety. Safety's overrated. Take a chance. Get out there and speak.
Judge Kwan, I just want to take just a moment, a personal privilege, if I might,
Sure,
to first thank you. There's never been a time in America's history in which the fight for civil rights had not come with suffering. Whether we're thinking about what happened during the transitions of slavery in this country or others that have moved in, whether I'm thinking about Dr. Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks, there's never been a time where they did not suffer. Dr. King was killed, and Rosa Parks lost her job too. And not only did she lose her job, her husband lost his. It takes that kind of suffering, and I just want to commend you and thank you again. You deserve a huge debt of gratitude for doing what you did. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for it.